Welcome and thank you for watching. I am Carrie Moe from El Paso Community College's Chicano Studies program. Today's discussion is part of our Las Platicas lecture series made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Joining me is one of the nation's leading voices in the Mexican-American community, whose work embodies what we aim to achieve in our program. He is a preeminent activist scholar who has been and remains a pivotal force in Chicano studies. He is a founding chair of the largest Chicano studies department in the United States. He has an extensive publication list, which includes more than 160 articles, book reviews, and even books for children. In addition, he has authored 20 books, including Occupied America, A History of Chicanos, Sometimes There Is No Other Side, Anything But Mexican, and most recently, Corridors of Migration. His work fosters critical inquiry and has motivated faculty, students, and communities. I am pleased to present Dr. Rodolfo Acuna from California State University, Northridge. Welcome, Dr. Acuna.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here today. The epilogue in Occupied America poses the question, is Antonio Banderas a Chicano? Could you explain your definition of a Chicano?
It's really, whether he's a Chicano or even in the broader sense, a Latino. I believe that what makes a Chicano is a person that has a consciousness of being here, knowing the issues, a person who has been discriminated against. The same thing, let's say, with Puerto Ricans. I don't think that a person who comes here from Spain is a Chicano or a Mexican American or a person who has a history of being at odds with the United States vis-a-vis racism. So consequently, you have Antonio Banderas, who's evidently a very nice person, a fantastic person, but he is from Spain. He came from a middle-class background. He doesn't know or doesn't have the experiences that people have here in the United States. Let's say, for example, I don't like the past Attorney General, Gonzalez, but I can't say he's not a Chicano because he has had that experience of being here in the United States and having suffered that discrimination.
How do you think the definition of Chicano has changed over the past 20 years?
Yeah, it's changed an awful lot. Remember, it was brought about by largely a Pocho generation, a generation who was second, who had been born here. Many of them hadn't, but they had been brought up here. You also have the history of the repatriation, the history of World War II, so there's a background there. And when they took on the term, a political term. This is what Chicano is, that they're dedicated to bringing up the economic and the political well-being of most of their people. So today, you don't have that. Today you have largely an immigrant population, and much of the immigrant population doesn't really want to identify with the Chicano, which Chicano is to them a bad word, pejorative word. They want to keep their Mexican identity. But how can you keep your Mexican identity when the reality here in the United States is much different? I think that unknowingly, the immigrant themselves have purged the term Chicano.
What direction do you think the term needs to take in the future to maintain your vision of what the goal of identity is?
Well, whatever we call ourselves, that we have to keep an identity. If we call ourselves Mexican, we have to be specific and say that we're Mexican Americans, because we have to still be cognizant of the fact that you go back to Mexico and you're a Pocho in Mexico. I think that people have to become much more politicized. I think that they have to bond with a community. And then the only way that you can bond with a community is by identifying with that community. I mean, who are you identifying with if you use the word Hispanic? You see, who are you identifying with if you identify with the word Latino? They're nebulous. They're not specific to any one nationality or any one group. You look at the way, let's say, the New Mexicans have used the word Hispano. It's saying, well, I'm Mexican. Shit, no, I'm not Mexican. You see, it's almost, they've taken it as a word of insult.
You've been very involved in Chicano studies, starting one of the largest Chicano studies departments in our country. Do you think that Chicano studies is a discipline?
I think it is an area of study. I don't think it's a discipline in itself. I don't think it's a discipline in the same way that you look at history. But it's an area in which history fits. You look at American studies, or you look at Asian studies, or you look at African studies. There are different ways of looking at that corpus of knowledge. You can look at it through the literary perspective, you can look at it through the historical perspective, the sociological perspective, political science. It's a way of looking at that corpus of knowledge and coming up with different interpretations. You see, this is what American studies is. The same thing with Chicano studies. You see, it's an area study, so it has multiple disciplines within it. I think it's something that most Chicano studies professors don't understand. They don't understand the difference between an area studies and a discipline. If I was a discipline, then we just could teach, let's say, sociology and teach race theory. And that would be Chicano studies. You see, this is what they did in the early days. They would take a person with a literary background and they would have them teaching Chicano history. Well, it's not really Chicano history. You have to use the methodology, you see. And so let's say, for example, in our program, I teach the history classes. Another person teaches the art classes. I couldn't teach an art class. I don't know that much about Chicano art, and what I know is pretty, let's say, broad. I don't know the methodology because let's say an art historian can look at things an awful lot differently than I do. So in that way that we're area studies. We're not a specific discipline.
What direction do you see Chicano studies taking at this time?
Well, it depends upon the community itself. The 1960 community was very specific with the identification of the word. Well, when you start to look at, let's say, for example, if everybody accepts the term Hispanic, what are Hispanic studies? I mean, you really can't be specific. What are we going to study the history of all of Latin America? Well, how is this then different from Latin American studies? You really have to be specific in your terms. And I don't think that we categorize things. You know, the porn industry has done a better job than we do in categorizing people. And you have to start to look at those things. And you have to be very rigorous in that categorization.
Are you satisfied with the direction? Or are you concerned with the direction?
I'm concerned with direction. One of the things that I'm concerned with direction, I think that we over